Hey everyone, welcome to Locked In, the channel that brings the best college football intel to the modern fan. We appreciate all of you who've watched our channel and would love for you to become part of the channel by clicking the subscribe button. This will help us become more visible on YouTube and help us achieve our goal of raising football IQs everywhere through in-depth analysis in plain English. Thanks everyone. Stay locked in.
And even when it comes to the LSU Wisconsin game, I know we didn't talk about that one before the game, but that was a really good ball game. Wisconsin plays their brand of football, which is just a bunch of cornbread fed boys out there, not really too athletic, just playing smart football. I mean, they did a good job. LSU came back in the end and won. Say LSU looks to be like they might be something next year. I mean, not too many people set out of that ball game for them. Say Jaden Daniels, the Heisman did, but like their backup, he looked solid. I think Nussmeier is his name,
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Yeah,
So he looks solid. So they should have a few receivers besides Neighbors coming back next year. So I mean, I think LSU's in a good spot to go into next year. Good. I think the SEC as a whole is going to get a lot harder, especially with Oklahoma and Texas coming in. But like just the general SEC is going to get better in terms of like Mizzou's going to be good next year. They're returning a lot. Kentucky will be very good next year. They're gaining a lot. Ole Miss is getting even better next year. Jackson Dart staying. So that SEC will be a pretty fun conference to watch next year.
yeah, I think you're right. I think a lot of those teams are going to look better. And like what you said, I mean, I know Ole Miss is not one of the games today, but just given what Kiffin has done with transfers this winter break
Mm-hmm.
and what they did against Penn State, that program looks like it's in a lot better shape than it has been recently.
Yeah, with the uptick of the SEC teams, talking about going into next year, expecting a lot more of them to be not only just decent but good and competitive with one another. I think Ole Miss has done its due diligence before we've even hit the new year, or before they hit the new year, to get set up ready for 2024, where they're able to compete at the upper echelon of those teams. So that's good for Kiffin, good for Ole Miss. I know Tennessee fans hate that man's guts for good reason, but I mean I'm happy to see Ole Miss succeed in that way. I think they were really close this year to just being into the tier one. I'd they were sitting right there on the line for me, and you could see that like when they played Georgia, they play a good quarter and even a decent half, and then Georgia kind of runs away with it for a couple plays happen and Ole Miss kind of shuts off a little bit. So I expect them to be even better next year, where they're able to really push the boundary of how good Ole Miss has been able to be. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they play, and obviously Jackson Dart coming back next year is a game changer for them.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I really can't contain myself from saying this. After watching these semi games, I mean, we knew pretty much exactly how they'd go. Say it was the games looked to be a little closer on the scoreboard than they actually were, in my opinion. But I just Texas honestly did not deserve to be there. So we talked about it before, the Big 12 being not as good and their loss to Oklahoma early in the season and beating Alabama. So that really didn't show a lot. Beating Alabama and the loss to Oklahoma showed a lot. So Texas isn't that good. Um, the Big 12 isn't that good. So they played a terrible defensive game tonight. I and I mean Washington tried to give them the game. I mean Michigan tried to give Alabama the game too. So I mean you got to look at both ends of the spectrum there. But like if you have Georgia and Florida State, I mean, there's an argument that you get better games in this playoff. So this year would have been the best year to do a 12-man team
For
playoff.
sure.
100%. I would have loved it. It would have been very good. So you would have had Arizona as the 4 team. Probably if you take Texas and put them in the SEC. It's really funny how that works.
Hey, respect to Arizona. They closed out this season on an
They
absolute
did.
high note. I mean, congrats to them. Finished top 15, won a bunch of
And
games at the end of the season. Great job.
then they'll go into the Big 12 and probably win that next year.
Good chance of it.
Yeah, a very
That's a
good
good
chance
shot.
of it. So I mean, it's just an interesting day down here. I mean, we pretty much knew what would happen. But like I have no stock in that Big 12, no stock in Texas to say. I think Quinn will probably come back next year. So it looked like Arch was ready to go in for most of that game, if I'm being honest. But obviously they didn't put him in. I don't put much stock into Arch either. Quinn didn't look too impressive. I'll say their athletes made some plays. Their run game did what we thought it would against Washington, but so I just did not really enjoy Texas being in the playoffs.
I just don't think that you can count on Quinn Ewers. I just really
Right.
don't. I mean, I think he's the kind of guy who will he's a prototype of a type of quarterback who is he's spunky. He can pick up some yards with his feet when he needs to. So he can make a play. He's got a little bit of magic in him. Uh, but what gets me is like how many times that he just makes just completely errant throws. Um,
Yep.
not on the same page with anybody. And he doesn't look sharp. I mean, he really doesn't. He looks like I think that he is in that in the kind of that what I would call that Brett Favre category. I
Gunslinger.
would see him if he played. So here's a good experiment. Do you think that there's a possibility that when Texas goes to the SEC next season, Quinn Ewers throws as many interceptions as he throws touchdowns?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
say they're
Now,
yeah,
I'm not saying that on the whole, because I know in college that the stats are they're skewed because there are plenty of people that you play that, he's going to light up. But
Sure.
if we bring this into like the splits category, what do you think there's a likelihood that against say top 15 opponents, so the top half of the SEC, he throws as many touchdowns as picks? I think he does, and I think
Yeah,
that's
I
who
agree.
he is.
say you look at their
And
schedule.
I think that Texas, even though no, it is possible they could get a softer schedule. Yeah, I don't know what their schedule looks like, but the thing though that I think is that I know perception is that SEC gets tougher with Oklahoma and Texas, but what people are not talking about is Oklahoma and Texas's life is fixing to change for the worse in a way that I think they're not ready for.
I agree.
Yeah, with you saying that though, like Texas plays Michigan next year. Um, and that's week 2. So that'll be fun. So and then the SEC games they have is Mississippi State, Oklahoma, Georgia, Vanderbilt, Florida, Arkansas, Kentucky, and Texas A&M. And Georgia's the only team that like I could really write home about. Maybe
Mhm.
Kentucky next year about him throwing picks because I see Kentucky getting a lot better, but like they don't have too bad of a schedule
Yeah,
next year
they
compared to
got
some of the
protected.
people.
The SEC protected them a little bit, didn't run them through a gauntlet in their first SEC year. Good for the SEC for protecting their new brand because they want to make that brand look good. Fair enough. I mean, I think something that you see that's I think all three of us, we have the same view of the Big 12, which is they are not as good as advertised. And we understand there are big brands there, a few. And we understand that they're really fun to watch because you see a bunch of points. When you're coming at it from a football perspective, though, and a scheme perspective, and just in general, looking at them compared to other conferences, I think I would say they're the weakest, or at least tied with the weakest. And now that the two big brands of the Big 12 move over to the SEC, well, these two big brands have historical struggles with the teams that they will be seeing in the SEC, especially Oklahoma over the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years. When they encounter good SEC schools, they struggle sometimes, especially in the playoff era. They have not, I don't think they have a win against a good SEC opponent. So I think Locke hits the nail on the head when we're talking about these two big branch in the Big 12 coming over. I think they're going to have some struggles. And can you pull up Oklahoma's schedule? I'm just curious if the SEC kind of protected them the way they clearly did with Texas.
Yeah, so they play Tennessee, Auburn, Texas, South Carolina, Ole Miss, Missouri, Alabama, and LSU. So I think
Okay,
they do have a harder
much
schedule,
harder.
but I mean, honestly, I think Missouri has one of the easier schedules. say they don't play anybody necessarily to write home about that's not in the SEC. I'd say Boston College is their hardest game out of the SEC, and then in the SEC, it's Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, Auburn, Alabama, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Arkansas, and Mississippi State. So I could see Missouri losing one game, and if that, maybe not even one game in the regular season next year.
So, question off of that kind of is in the same, I guess, the same neighborhood as my Texas Oklahoma statement. Do you think that the addition of Texas and Oklahoma dilutes the SEC schedule to the point that you're going to have multiple teams coming out with 1-2 losses if the schedule falls their way that really aren't what you would call elite?
Oh, I think it's going to be almost impossible to come out of the SEC without a loss. For probably ever now. I'm gonna say if anybody ever does it, it'll be really impressive. But with all the good teams and then the best two teams playing in the SEC championship, it's going to be very hard to come out without a loss.
For me, I mean, I understand both points there. Um, I do think I think this is something the SEC has done before in previous seasons, where they have given some of their better teams or a team that they want to see do well, they've given them a better schedule, and they have not
Mhm.
allowed them playing good teams. I mean, I know, I'm sitting here with a massive Georgia fan, but I don't feel like you could deny that the last couple of years, Georgia has been given a cupcake SEC schedule compared to other schools in the SEC.
And they're
Maybe this
making up for it this year. They're making up for it this year, I'll tell you that.
So good for the SEC for actually giving them a challenge, because these last couple times, whenever the schedule is released, I think I've actually texted Chance maybe twice or talked to Chance twice each year that release has happened. I'm like, man, they gave you guys another one. Like, y'all just won the national championship, and boom, here's a cupcake schedule where there's not a single one of these games that you guys should be close in, except maybe one.
And what's even better is they made us take Oklahoma off this year to make it even easier.
Right. So again, I think what Locke is saying is going to reign true, just because there are more teams now. So the schedule is going to have to shift. The way the schedule works is going to have to shift. So I think you may get what I call paper tigers. So you're going to have a couple guys, a couple teams who look great, but then when you go up to them and you touch them and you play them, they fold. So I think you might have a couple of those that they sneak their way out with one loss. Um, the playoff system with 12 now, 2 lost teams are going to be able to get in.
Mhm.
So with that, I think you could even have a team that blows all of their terrible competition out of the water, and then loses one game badly, loses one game close, and because those losses come to really good teams, you have a team that can sneak in with 2 losses into the playoff because they come from the SEC. Because I mean, despite you know how many championships have been won or whatever, there's obviously a clear bias towards the SEC, even when some of those teams aren't as good as advertised. Or sorry, as good as I think they are. They are just advertised as a really good team. So I think you're going to have a situation where you're going to have, like you're talking about, a couple teams that kind of get under that easy schedule, and they pop up into the playoff. It's like, oh, that team really didn't belong there, but congrats, you got through.
I think it's the Big 12 West phenomenon that you have a division that doesn't really have, I mean, like, there's not a single killer in that division. And so if the schedule falls right, like for instance, this year with Iowa, when they in the regular season, the only top tier Big Ten team they play is Penn State.
Right.
That's a pretty favorable schedule. And if you notice, I mean, this is something. I mean, everybody knows I'm the one that the sky, I believe the sky is falling on me and everybody else, every minute of the day. So I'm pretty pessimistic on all things and pretty cynical. If you want a dose of cynicism, Iowa only wins whenever certain teams are not on their schedule. And this year, that was one of the features of their schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't like that. I don't like seeing those years whenever you have a team that slides through and you're like, oh, this is a generational team. And it's like, no, this is that good schedule that falls to you about every 6 or 7 years. Um, because to me it matters. And also like the thing on the SEC, one of the things that I think we're getting to now, I think there's a lot of, I don't know, I think, and maybe that's a different discussion, but I think I think college football, and it's not just like transfer portal and things like that. I think that it is on the cusp of having to radically change, to really
Oh,
consider
yeah.
broad scale reorganization. Because you take the problem of the Big 12. That's a conference that cannot compete on a national level. Now I know that Texas was in the semifinal tonight, and good for them. But like we said, um, if you go back and dissect that game is not close.
Missouri beats them,
Texas,
so there's multiple
yeah,
teams that
I
beats
agree with you.
Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you 100% that anybody worth their salt in that, like what Rev called, like that top tier, like those, maybe 8 or 10 teams. I think that they, on if you play them 3 times, I think they beat Texas every time. And 2 of those times, I think they beat them soundly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I'm just interested to see what happens because I mean, obviously the Pac-10, Pac-12, it's dead.
Yep. Gone.
Um, there is no such thing. And I simply do not think that your next tier of conferences, I don't think they can hang with the top teams. Like for instance, Liberty. Liberty gave them hell for about 2 quarters, but that's all the players that Liberty has. And
Right.
what I think is tough is like whenever it's a depth chart game.
Yep.
That if they had the players, it would be really interesting. But the fact of business is that they don't have the players. They're not going to have the players anytime soon. They have thin rosters, they have small programs, and they simply cannot compete. And so what ends up happening with this is you go back to I remember a game, and I would really like to I'd like to go back and watch that game again, and I would like to find the interview that they did with the head coach. It was the Minnesota Gophers. They beat Michigan. Um, this has been a while back. I mean, a long while back, honestly. Um, this was, do y'all remember the year whenever, or the few years whenever Minnesota had at running back Marion Barber and Lawrence
Mm-hmm.
Peroni?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
They were flat out good, and they beat Michigan. And after the game, ESPN interviews Glenn Mason, who is the head coach, and Mason is almost, in tears over having beat Michigan. And, and they're like, oh, tell us, coach, about, this emotional moment. And he just like gives them this look. And it's like, you have no idea what I'm thinking right now. He's like, we can't compete with them, and we just beat them. They're like, he said, we do not have the facilities to compete with them. He's like, there are 3 teams in this conference that no other team, no team in like that little group of like, basically 8, because it was 11 teams back then. He's like,
Mm-hmm.
we cannot hang with them. So to beat them says more than anybody can ever understand. And I thought, yeah, you just put your finger right on it. And I don't think that's something that people want to hear. I don't think that's something big college football wants to hear, NCAA wants to hear. But you have got the gap between the haves and the have lesses is so big. And I feel like it's just getting bigger. So I don't know. I mean, I'm really interested to see where college football goes in the next, say 5 years, because I feel like it's changing a lot. Everyone here at Locked In wants to say thank you to all of you who have subscribed to, liked, and commented on our channel. We've got a blast bringing great college football analysis to you. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button. If you want to share your thoughts, we'd love to see your comments. Till next time, stay locked in.